All right. I guess it's a little bit after 3:30. We should probably get started. So we'll start off with the chair slides. My co-chair, Logan, said that he might not be able to make it today, so might be flying solo on this one. So bear with me on that, but I think we'll be able to do it just fine. The Notewell is up. This is the first day of IETF, so some of you guys may have not seen this yet. Please pay attention to the Notewell. It is important. It has a bunch of information about how we deal with patents and copyright and code of conduct and anti-harassment. So make sure you're familiar with all of these before you participate. And then especially we're calling out the code of conduct. Please debate technical ideas in a respectful and polite way. Please try to avoid making comments about people and personalities. It's not helpful for moving the discussion forward, which is what we're trying to do. And then this is the agenda. I know we had one or two changes in presenters, but I think the agenda itself is unchanged. But if anybody has comments or modifications they'd like to make to the agenda, please speak up now. Okay, we got one person in the queue.
Yes, hello. So I will be presenting the ad hoc postcode profile and the group postcode profile. So to make them back to back, you could possibly move the ad hoc postcode profile to the second from last point, if it's more convenient to have the same presenter consecutively.
Yeah, I saw the request to change the presenter, so thank you for presenting. And we're getting the doors closed. Thank you very much for that. We'll make it much easier to hear in here. All right. Any other changes to the agenda? All right. In that case, it looks like up first is draft IETF ACE COAP EST core. So let me get the slides up for that.
Could you pass me the control over the slides?
I will attempt to do so. But I'm not 100% sure how to do that. Otherwise, I can just run the slides for you if you would like.
Yeah, that's fine. I can just say next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so my name is Militia. I'll be presenting the updates to the draft ACE COAP EST or score. So we published 05 on 8th of July, fixing miscellaneous things throughout the document. My goal for the presentation today will be to present the resolutions of the closed issues, basically. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the first issue is issue number 36, which is consider the use of challenge password for signature keys without ad hoc. So the context here is that we use the challenge password field to implement the connection-based channel binding between transport and the app objects. When a static Diffie-Hellman key is enrolled, connection-based channel binding is essentially not needed. And for this reason in the draft, but there are other cases for which we need channel binding, and in the draft we use challenge password as optional, and it's left to the application profile to use it. So the issue refers to the clarification of the use of challenge password when the ad hoc session and enrollment are executed with different keys. And essentially what we did is we clarified security considerations on channel binding, specifying essentially how to that application profile can specify when this is used in this specific case. Next slide, please. issue number 19. So this was an issue to clarify the scope in the introduction and the abstract. So there are two resolutions to this issue. Essentially, we clarify the credentials used for initial authentication. This is, you can see the diff here in the slide. Essentially, we stated what was already assumed by EST, which is that the initial credentials, how the initial trust is established between the client and the server is out of scope, but the trust relation needs to exist. We also wrote new abstract, which you can see on the diff here. And if you can switch to the next slide, please. And as I was saying, we clarify the use of initial authentication credentials to stress that the trust relation between the client and the server must exist, but how it is established is out of scope. So this is the new text in the draft. Next slide, please. This was an issue raised by Yoran on adding a message flow example. So the context is that there was no example in the document summarizing how the thing works. So what we did is we added a message flow example with optimizations, with OSCOR and ad hoc piggybacked into the same OSCOR message as per draft in core, that's specified in core. And so we added this example in order to complete the document, and there are some TBDs that are placeholders for some registrations performed in the COSI document on CBOR encoded certificates. Next slide, please. Other than that, we did some miscellaneous updates, aligning the private key container with draft, with the COSI draft on CBOR encoded certificate structure and the structures in that draft. And we are essentially using the private key media type that is defined in that document. And then there were some miscellaneous fixes on references throughout the document, essentially aligning with the latest version. Next slide, please. So in terms of open issues, there are two open issues at the moment on GitHub, as far as I remember. Issue number 52, which needs to specify the CDDL structure of CSR attributes endpoint, which is still not done. And then there is the issue number 54, which was raised by Yoran on the selection of the type of enrollment credentials. So the issue here is the preliminary knowledge that the client, what kind of preliminary knowledge the client can have in order to make a meaningful enrollment request. And we are considering leveraging ad hoc cipher suite negotiation to help with the decision on what kind of algorithms the enrollment request can contain. So this is in terms of the open issue. Next slide, please. In terms of the next steps, I will be resolving these two open issues on GitHub, and then I believe we will be ready for working group last call on this document. So that would be all for this presentation. Are there any questions?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay.
But thank you, and I'm glad to hear we're getting close to working group last call. That's great news.
Sounds good.
All right. And so next on the agenda is PubSub profile. All right, and I have figured out how to pass slide control if you would like it.
No, it's okay if you drive the slides for me.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Chidam Shangun, and I'm going to present the PubSub profile updates. We are in version 10, but the updates will cover version 9 and 10. Next slide, please. Just a recap of what we are trying to do with this profile. This is a profile of GroupCom, and the idea is to protect the communication of the PubSub clients when they're doing PubSub communication with a broker system. We would like to be able to authorize PubSub clients to be able to communicate with the broker in a permitted fashion, depending on their roles, either publisher or subscriber. And we would also like to be able to protect the end-to-end data communication between publishers and subscribers, even though this communication is disseminated by the broker. To secure communication, we rely on a transport protocol of transport profile of ACE between client and broker and KDC. And between publishers and subscribers, we use COSE for the end-to-end protection of the data. Next slide, please. Okay, so there has been a lot of cleanup of writing editorial fixes to this document, both in version 9 and 10, thanks to Marco. We made sure that we aligned better to the IETF ACE key GroupCom, which this is a profile of. And for example, we introduced the parameter exe in the join response, used problem details for the error responses, and then also fixed the steps for the end-to-end data protection between publishers and subscribers, detailing the COSE encrypt zero object better. We also now detail clearly how the NS challenge is defined separately for DTLS 1.2 and 1.3. Next slide. Okay, we spent quite a bit of time on the scope. There are not many changes, but we improved the naming. And the scope basically allows for the clients to ask permissions on a group. This could be a PubSub topic, which is an application group, or a security group where the audience is KDC. And the PubSub permission details include an admin, which is always 0 for this profile, but it kind of sets the ground for the future work for permissions that could be assigned to an administrator client. And then the app group kind of signals whether this is permissions for an application group or a security group. And then we identify 3 permissions, publish, read, and delete. And then we've added some changes, more explanations about the delete operation in version 10. Next slide, please. We basically clarified that if the delete permission is on the application group and there are no other permissions asked for that, the client doesn't need to interact with the KDC or join the security group because it's not trying to protect any communication. If the delete permission is on the security group, then this can be safely ignored, basically. So we detailed a little bit of that delete operation use. We also added more details on the key in the join response, kind of changed the naming a little bit, added information about the group key and group sender ID, which is used only by the publishers and not the subscribers. We also, although we've listed a number of exchanges that could happen between KDC and the group members, now we give more details about them. And these include obtaining the latest information about the group keying material, the sender ID, the way the publisher can request a new sender ID if it runs out of sequence numbers, how can a publisher update an authentication credentials, and particularly leaving a group, either client initiated or the KDC initiated. Next slide, please. We've added, we used always the default rekeying process defined in the GroupCom. Now we added more details on this process in the messages. specifically clarifying that the version number must be incremented and a new group identifier must be generated, and the current value of the sender IDs should be preserved. A new addition is the replay checks at the subscriber. This is built on the approach used by OSCORE, where the subscriber maintains the replay window for each of the publishers in the same group. And the rest is basically tidying up the documents, providing more examples, especially for the delete operation, and etc. Next slide. There's not much to be done in this document, only we want to spend a bit more time thinking about making things easier for the clients to discover topic-related metadata at the broker, and we will think about a few more approaches for discovery of the topic names, and then also add information about group policies per the requirement 20 from the GroupCom profile. After that, we should be ready for last call. Next slide. That's it.
All right.
Any questions?
Looks like a no on questions for this one too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Up next is Ad Hoc OS Core profile.
Oh, sorry, I thought that was moved down as second from last item, right?
Okay, so which one are we doing next then?
That should be also
GM
GM
admin?
admin. That's right.
All right, we can do that.
Okay, thanks. I can ask for the slides.
Oh, yes.
Thanks. Just need to find them. There it is. Okay, hi everyone. This is Marco. This is an update on this working group document on the admin interface at the OSCORE Group Manager. And as a recap, it's an admin RESTful interface at the group manager responsible for security groups that use Group OSCORE as security protocol. At the group manager, we have a single instance of a group collection resource, and this resource has multiple child resources, one per existing and active security group where Group OSCORE is used. And from an ACE point of view, the interface is intended to be used by an administrator acting as ACE client, so exhibiting permissions to operate on it. And the group manager is the ACE resource server instead. And for the secure communication between the two, you can resort to the security protocol of the specific transport profile of ACE in use. Let's just put some graphics on what I said. There are some admin operations specific for the group collection resource for the sake of retrieving the list of existing security groups, all of them or some of them after some filter criteria have been applied, or it's possible to create a new security group with a post, and as a side effect, yet another resource detailed in a separate document is also created for the sake of joining that security group for its users. Then there are separately on the right operations on the group configuration resource, again, one per existing security group. And the admin can retrieve the current group configuration, all the parameters, only some selected ones, or perform an all-at-once overwriting of the current configuration or a selective update of some of its parameters only, or delete the configuration, hence the security group in question. So where were we in March? We completed the working group last call, and the version we had in March 11 was fully addressing already the reviews we got from Sigdem and Joran. Thanks a lot for that. And we had one more review from Karsten that was essentially not addressed with the exception of nits and editorials in a pull request that got merged already. but we addressed already some additional points from the authors. So after March, what was left to do was essentially addressing the review from Karsten that was provided off list. And that's what we did. We believe entirely in this version 12. If you're curious of how that review alone got addressed, it's also compiled on the PR number 6 on the GitHub, of course, now merged into this version 12. And other than minor editorial improvements, of course, always present, it touches different points in terms of IANA clarifications, legal protocol behavior enhancements, and so on. On the IANA considerations, it was mostly about minor fixes on registry column names and trying to be more aligned and homogeneous with conventions that we have already in a number of ACE registries. But getting into the more interesting stuffs, there were a few major clarifications to introduce as early as possible in the document, and the terminology already clarified the relation in URI path between the path component that is supposed to express the group name and its semantic, just referring to the ABNF grammar from RFC 3986. And we stress now that /manage that we use as URI path from the group collection resource is just an example. It's not even supposed to be named a default choice. Just an example. In section 4.1 later on, we have clarified that what we presented as an example, again, of main administrator, assistant administrator, is just a case in point, an example to show that in general, you may have multiple administrators responsible for the same security group and corresponding resources of the group manager sharing different responsibilities in different possible ways. Karsten also noticed that we were interchangeably and a bit confusingly using the words parameters and properties for the information element in the group configuration. Fair point. Now we use parameters alone, and we also clarified the difference conceptually between the configuration and status parameters. We took the opportunity to improve only from a presentation point of view the default values that these parameters can take. We stressed, nothing new though, the expected semantics and use of the co-application path option in the messages where it is present. And Karsten also noticed that some text we had summarized at the end of the slide was originally in the security consideration, but it wasn't really about security. So we moved it up in the document because it was in fact about operational considerations. On explicit definitions, it was suggested that we recap at least the concept at a high level of secure communication association, even if that is provided by the transport profile used. Now we have an entry in the terminology. And when we get into defining the format of scope per the AF data model, we also recap the concept of scope, not brand new, of course, just building on what it comes from OAuth in the first place, and then the ACE framework. Then you see this point coming again in the next presentations. I think we adopted another proposal from Karsten in the examples in CBOR diagnostic notation to be more correct to be used during the work on the internet draft. It's going to be removed at publication time as an RFC, but it's intended to be a correct placeholder for values that are supposed to be picked up by a CDL data model that we have in an appendix and to be read in place of these placeholders in the examples. On the topic of a complex group name patterns that we could always use in the AF data model and as a regular expression, it was also suggested to not suggest anymore the possible use of the CBOR tag 35. That is not recommended for a number of limitations. So now we stick only to 21065. When we have regular expressions as name patterns, and we have updated the examples also accordingly. And on the same topic, we have an appendix that is supposed to be only an example of a possible suggested implementation direction on the authorization server for handling such complex patterns when processing an authorization request. So we revisited the appendix and rewritten it to be a bit simple and clearer. And again, it is just an example. There were a lot of comments on the expected atomic nature of some operation at the group manager, starting with considerations and approaches to prevent or reduce the risk of race conditions in case there are multiple administrators responsible for the same group at the group manager, and clarifying exactly what must or must not happen at which resource in order to respect this atomicity requirements for the different resources for the different operations of those. And you can find the details in the different sections describing the operations on those resources. And still on the topic of specific operations on the resources at the group manager, Karsten also noticed that we were repeating over and over the sanity checks, the permission and authorization enforcement checks that the group manager had to perform resource by resource for each operation. It got a bit tedious. It was prone to error and slight differences. So we just define once and for all, as soon as possible, what we mean to have permissions for an administrator, as if it was the prototype of a function call. And then in line, when we get into the right resources and the right operation, we just say, oh, well, those checks defined in shape earlier in the document are supposed to be performed, considering this exact target group name and this exact permission that the administrator is requesting to use here. And it was also noted that one particular operation follows, in fact, the semantic of the REST post method, while it was presented as to be performed with put request. So we changed the method for the request to operate on that resource to overwrite at once the group configuration. It is post now. And finally, on the specific operations patch and IPatch for selectively update the value of some parameters of the group configuration, we provided some more details and example or operation that can be invalid because they are invalid as requested in the first place, or because they would be conducive to a wrong, inconsistent, or nonsense new configuration where they executed. So again, to summarize, this version should have addressed all the working group last comments and reviews now. Of course, it would be great if Karsten can also confirm that he's happy with the way we addressed his comments. I think we have two editorial pending points that can be hopefully addressed in the next iterations without stopping the draft even further. One is 5 instances of an editorial note about clerical naming alignment for one particular parameter in another ACE document that is currently under AD review. So we prefer not to touch the document for now, but when we got the AD review from Paul and we start working on that, we'll be sure to align that parameter name. And the second one is a comment we got from Ayana last week, suggesting a particular notation for placeholder values that wait for registration right now. And this is definitely something we can address in the immediate next version of the document. As a reminder, we have an implementation of this building on the implementation of that other ACE document I mentioned before and above in this slide. And it's available openly on my Bitbucket. So absent more issues, and the authors are not aware of any at the moment, we think in its current status, the document should be ready to be considered for the Shepherd review and write-up. Thank you.
Okay. Should we, given that there was a fairly large number of changes since the original, I'm correct on that, there was actually a reasonably large number since the original working group last call, or am I misremembering?
This review was the biggest one.
Okay.
Followed by SIGDEMS.
Yes, Karsten's was very large. That's what I remember. The reason I was bringing that up is because possibly before we do the Shepherd write-up and things like that, do you think it would make sense to just recirculate the current version for another 2 weeks just to see if anybody spots anything, or do you think we should just go forward?
Up to you, ultimately.
Yeah,
no one should be surprised anyway. Oh, I don't want to influence you.
Yeah,
it's up to you. The authors thinks this is ready.
Okay, the authors think it's ready. I'll take that.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions then? All right, that sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I can switch right away to the next one then. Yeah, that should be it. All right, and this is an update on the workflow and params document. Oh, somehow I cannot move to the next slide.
Yeah.
I can stop and ask again.
Let me try sharing slide control. I think
it works now. Okay,
perfect.
Awesome. Thank you. So as a recap, the scope of this document is a formal update to the main ACE framework specification 9200, and it started with the first two main points, defining an alternative execution flow for the ACE framework, where after issuing the access token, DAS uploads the token itself to the resource server on behalf of the client. And as a second point, we have been defining a number of additional auth parameters to use in ACE, some of which in support of the alternative workflow, other ones mostly in support of more efficiently distributing authentication credentials, especially in the case of a group audience for which the access token is issued. In more recent versions, we have also proposed the amendment of two requirements on the transport profile of ACE. It was little more than editorial anyway, and we deprecated the original custom format of error responses in ACE in favor of introducing the problem details machine actionable format standardized in RFC 9290. Okay, some updates in this version other than editorial improvements. Well, the notation I mentioned before with placeholders for values to be imported in a CDDL model. It is used here to in the examples in CBOR diagnostic notation. So this should stay all the way until publication time, basically. Right, specific on the alternative workflow, we have made explicit, of course, that the communication between the AS and the RS is supposed to be secured all along as expected by the main ACE framework specification. And that means that every single token that per the alternative workflow the AS uploads to the RS is supposed to be shipped over a secure channel, even the first one in a token series, in addition to those issued for dynamically updating access rights. We have also added a remark building on a suggestion we got from Dave Robin in Brisbane. Thank you very much. This is possible to be seamlessly used also in scenarios where the clients are, well, not really ACE clients. They're not even aware there is an AS and tokens involved. Building on pre-configuration, the AS that issues and uploads the access token on the RS, these clients can just go ahead and according to those configurations, access resources at the RS. On the parameters related to the alternative workflow, we revised the semantic of one of those, token upload, and we define a new one, token hash, that I show in the next slides. So on token upload, we had that already, and it used to be Boolean, true or false, both in access token request and response. It's still used in both messages, but it's now an unsigned integer. And at a high level, it has still the same original meaning when it was still a Boolean. So in the access token request, the client can include it to kindly ask the AS to consider uploading the access token to the RS on behalf of the client. But now it's also taking an unsigned integer as a value that can be 0, 1, and 2 at the moment. It means that if the AS actually goes ahead using the alternative workflow and the upload of the access token to the RS is successful, then in the access token response, the client is expecting respectively nothing particular related to the token, or only the token hash, or only the access token. And in the access token response, this parameter is present even only if the AS actually used the alternative workflow, irrespective of the result of that operation. And then the value of the parameter gives exactly an indication of the result. So it's 0 in case of success, 1 in case of failure. And well, in case of failure, the access token is included so that the client can try itself and maybe can have better luck. Otherwise, it's 0 in case of success. And together with that parameter, you may have nothing special related to the token or the token hash or the token, depending on what was indicated by the client in the access token request with that same parameter. In case you take the token hash territory, well, that's included in the token response, consistent with what was wished by the client and indicated in the access token request. The value of the token hash is computed without going into too many details, following the same approach that is defined to compute token hashes in another ACE document, revoke token notification, also to be consistent with that service, and because, well, we had defined once already how token hash can be computed. And if the authorization server provides that service for revoke token notification and computes those token hashes based on a certain hash algorithm, then the AS has to use the same hash algorithm also to compute token hashes to be included in the token hash parameter here. Of course, you may wonder why would the client be interested in obtaining the token hash or the access token if the alternative workflow was used and the access token was successfully uploaded by the AS to the RS? Well, the reason to obtain the token hash in any way is to be able to still take advantage of the service revoke token notification if the client is interested too, for example. Or the reason to obtain the access token would be for the client to be able to re-upload that same access token itself to the RS, which is, for example, something defined in the OSCOR profile of ACE, RFC 9203. Just some examples from the draft here, comparing side by side 3 successful uses of the alternative workflow, where you can see that in the response at the bottom of the slide, the AS is providing the client with nothing special on the left, the token hash in the middle, the access token on the right, consistent with the wish expressed by the client in the access token request. You have more examples in the draft. Okay, more updates, and this is the second major update in the draft. Actually, we are starting to explore an efficient approach to enforce bidirectional access control between 2 devices, say Dev1 and Dev2, participating in the ACE protocol. What you see in this slide is something that has been always possible with vanilla ACE as we know it. You may have these 2 devices, Dev1 and Dev2. You want to have a primary direction, say, from Dev1 and Dev2. So Dev1 can act as ACE client, request for an access token with audience Dev2 and scope access rights that are granted to Dev1 for accessing resources and Dev2. At the same time, you want access control in the opposite direction. So you want Dev2 to access protected resources at Dev1. Well, that's easily possible if Dev2 also acts as ACE client, requests for a second access token, uploads it to Dev1, and consistent with that access token accesses protected resources and Dev1. Taking inspiration also from an issue open on the GitHub by Christian, thanks for that, we started to explore if we can achieve the same result, but issuing only one access token that covers both directions more efficiently. Turns out it seems to be possible. We have sketched the first solution already available in this version of the draft. And it's important to notice that there is only one access token to be issued. So only one of the 2 devices here is actually the ACE client requesting for the access token, Dev1 in this example. So Dev2 is the only resource server in this example. Dev1 will request for 1 access token. And regarding the primary direction from Dev1 to Dev2, well, it's the same. Audiences scope used the same way as in the previous case. But at the same time, this access token also includes a reverse audience and a reverse scope, essentially granting Dev2 with access rights for accessing protected resources at Dev1. And this, of course, builds on new parameters, revout and rev scope, and corresponding token claims to be included in the access token. Yeah, this just gives some more details on the parameters here. It's pretty simple. Device one request for an access token using, again, out and scope like for the original case, but additionally using revout and rescope to specify the permissions that dev1 is happy to grant to dev2 for accessing resources at itself, basically. So we have dev1 as reverse audience and permissions for dev2 to accessing resources at dev1 as reverse scope. So the primary direction is based on the original out and scope, while the reverse direction is based on revout and rev scope. But for both directions, of course, it's up to the AS to check the right permissions of the right devices according to the corresponding access control policies to be evaluated. Some early consideration, of course, the access control in both directions have to rely on secure communication according to a secure association established and used per the transport profile of ACE in use. It is still possible to perform dynamic update of access rights, like in the original case, with a caveat. We have only one access token here. We have only one access token requester, dev1. So again, this is possible, but it has to be initiated and triggered by dev1 requesting for a new access token in the same token series that updates the access rights in one, the other, or both directions. And good news for the alternative ACE workflow, it's definitely a separate orthogonal things. So it keeps working, even if the issued access token is intended to support access control in both directions very seamlessly. As next steps, in the proactive reviews from Ayana, we got a comment on this draft too, pretty easy to address. We got a new issue on the GitHub also open by Christian. Thank you very much on providing already some guidelines related to access tokens issued for group audiences, if relying specifically on the anchor CNF parameter when conveyed in the token response. And most of the work to be still done is on the alternative ACE workflow in itself. And for most of those points, we have already a pretty clear roadmap on the next steps to take in Appendix B of the document as placeholders. But we also want to continue exploring the just started bidirectional access control topic, in particular considering a more complex setup where there is not only one AS, but there are two. And in each AS, you have the two devices, dev1 and dev2, registered with one ACE role or the other, basically. And till then, of course, comments, input, review are very welcome. Thanks a lot.
All right, I do have one comment / question, actually. I'm actually really intrigued by this bidirectional access control idea. I think it's actually quite clever to be able to negotiate a bidirectional access control at the same time. It makes a lot of sense for lots of peer-to-peer communication scenarios. I was wondering, did you guys get this from somewhere else, or are there other places where this pattern is used? Because I think it's actually quite interesting.
Not to my knowledge. Christian opened the issue originally. Christian.
Christian, I'm just I don't know of any other place where this has been used this way. The motivational use case was with the registration with the resource directory, where both parties act as a client during the setup.
Okay. Yeah, no, I want to think more about it because it's definitely an idea that I think is possibly worth reusing as a pattern elsewhere because it's kind of clever. All right, any other questions? All right, I think we're moving on then to OS core profile.
Thank you.
Yeah, if it's all right, I can take the ad hoc OS core profile. I can start with that one. I asked to share the slides.
And you should have slide control.
Perfect, thank you. So yes, hello everyone. So I want to present some updates to this document with details on ad hoc OS core profile of ACE. And just as an overview, what this is about, well, it's a new profile of the ACE framework. It's using EDOC for key establishment and also optionally for the actual access token upload, where you put the token in an EDOC ED item. So the token is actually contained within an EDOC message. That's optional functionality. You may also post the token normally. It then uses OS Core for the actual secure communication based on keying material generated from the EDOC execution. And you can see here overview of the workflow. You request an access token, the client is granted one, it proceeds to run EDOC with the resource server, including the access token in EDOC message 3, and then it transitions to using OS Core for the actual access to the resource. And then I wanted to go over some of the main updates that was done in version 5, which is the latest version. So point number 1 was also covered in 2 previous presentations about using this notation for in the examples for importing values from a CDDL model. And there I have 2 figures. One is showing the actual example with the E notation, and then on the most right-hand side, you see the actual CDDL model we have defined for the document with the actual integer values. We also updated documents so that we actually use, if, for instance, scope, it already has a registered value, so then we indicate scope in comments and we write out the actual value 9 in the examples. Again, continue on with updates. We did a number of editorial improvements, and there was some fixes to the IANA considerations with regards to column names, the actual change controller, which was incorrect in some of the instances. And we also revised and extended now detailed registration policies for a new registry EDOC information that we're defining. We did a simplification of the draft. So now we're very clear that in this draft, only CWTs are supported as access tokens. So practically, we are ruling out JWTs, which is in general admitted by ACE. And the reason we did this is, I mean, it's a simplification really in a number of ways, and CWTs are recommended in the actual ACE framework. And we felt that for like the typical use case, practically will be using CWTs. We made the ACE workflow and params document an informative reference rather than normative. So we just point to it as an example of what you could do, and you could use that together with this profile. That would be all completely fine. And we do take some concepts, particularly the concept of token series is taken from that document, but it is expanded and used in a customized manner in this draft. So the third slide, 2 more updates. So number 1, we clarify that when you're running EDOC between the client and the resource server, it can be used in both the forward or the reverse message flows. So EDOC supports, basically, it has 2 different roles, initiator and responder. And what this means in practice in this profile is that the EDOC initiator can either be the ACE client or it can be the ACE resource server. So this allows for more flexibility in how you wish to execute EDOC. And in the first case, where the EDOC where the ACE client is initiator, the client will start EDOC by sending EDOC message 1 to the resource server. And in the second case, where the initiator is the resource server, the client, well, it starts with an actual request going to the resource server, but this is a trigger request that in turn triggers the resource server to respond with EDOC message 1. So it's the resource server that will be sending EDOC message 1. And this allows for more flexibility in how you choose to run it. And now what to actually choose, what to prefer, well, it depends on the deployment setting. And we have some text in the draft commenting on this. It mostly is relevant to which identity you wish to protect the most, because in EDOC, the initiator's identity is protected against active attackers. And a related point to this first point is that since we're allowing for both the forward and reverse message flows, Now we're allowing the access token to be transported in any of the 4 possible ad hoc messages. And each of these ad hoc messages has this EAD item where you can basically place additional data that you wish to convey. So if you're talking about the forward message flow, you would use the EAD item 1 or 3, and in the reverse message flow, you would use EAD item 2 or 4. And again, what use? Well, it depends about, well, first of all, the flow you're using, because the flow will tell you have 2 choices depending on the flow. And secondly, security and privacy properties you wish to achieve. And this is something we plan to add more text about in the draft. And there's also an open issue about this point. But we want to elaborate on this further in the draft text. So going to some next steps, what we're planning to do. We want to add consistency checking of the authentication credentials from different ad hoc fields. So what this means is that if an ad hoc EAD item is transporting the CWT, which includes the client's authentication credential, then we want to see that authentication credential from the ID cred field in the actual ad hoc message is the same as the one in the item. So practically, because ad hoc, of course, itself already has a field to transport authentication credential. And what we're saying is we want to see that that's consistent. Whatever you're transporting in ad hoc is consistent with the actual authentication credential in the CWT itself. It's just really a consistency check, I would say. Yeah, we got, this was also mentioned in 2 previous presentations, same IANA feedback. They requested that we add a new column called original specification in the OAuth parameter CBOR mappings. Of course, we will do that. Want to further elaborate and describe on actions to take if authentication credentials have been invalidated or deleted. For instance, they can be revoked, and this can be either for the client's authentication credential or the resource server's authentication credential. Here we can build on and expand on guidelines that are already written down in the Lake ad hoc implementation considerations document. Yeah, we want to expand because now we allowed, or we explicitly said you can use the ad hoc reverse message flow, but we want to add more text describing in more detail how you practically use it, and also like some example on this is how it looks if you're using the reverse message flow in this profile. We want to perform proof of possession of the client's private key at the authorization server. So when the authorization server receives the client's authentication credential in the XCNF parameter of the access token request, the authorization server should do some type of proof of possession of that credential. And lastly, we want to discuss how things will work if you're using access tokens issued to a group audience, to have some more discussion and guidelines on how that will work. Yeah, so that's it for this presentation. So,
All right, we do have a question. Christian?
Christian Amsus, I'm curious about that consistency check. Will that rule out that there can be both a CWT as used as the ID cred I, and then a CWT used to convey authorization information in the same step? Because I'll have to check when there's concrete text, but there are applications when it's desirable to have the authentication part and the authorization part separate. And without that consistency check, that there needs to be some consistency check, but the consistency check is not necessarily that those are the same items, but just that those are related.
Well, overall, what we had in mind is that they are in fact the same, but you had some use case in mind where they would diverge and be different.
Yeah, basically one would be a more long-term credential issued, and the other would add the rather short-lived authorizations in there. We can take that offline if
let's discuss more, because we had in mind more an absolute match, but yes, let's discuss further, definitely.
Thank you.
All right, Marco?
Yeah, hi, Christian, on your question, as far as I imagine it, it will not be ruled out because the consistency check is between ID cred or cred in the ad hoc message and the CNF into the access token That's the credential of the client and the initiator again. So what you have in mind should still be possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. I prepare to share or change to the next slide set.
Yeah.
So let me do it like this. Yeah, I asked again to share the slides.
Yep, it's coming up. And so this is for people who are following along. This is the group profile section.
There we go. Yeah. Right, so now I will move on to presenting the GrupoScore ACE profile, which now is latest version 2. So let's see if I can switch. Yes, I can switch the slides. So yes, as a recap, what this is about. It's about defining a profile for ACE for the GrupoScore protocol. And what this does, it enables access control for accessing resource at group members. Because GrupoScore, it's essentially an extension of OSCORE, providing secure group communication. And well, the profile is using GrupoScore as a security protocol between the C and the resource servers. And before you actually use this profile, the group joining procedure happens first, and that's defined in other documents, most particularly the ASK Group Com OSCORE document. And the actual access token, it will be bound to the already existing GrupoScore security context and the authentication credential of the client that the client is using in the group. Some important properties we have for this is when we do proof of session of the client's private key. This is achieved when a first GrupoScore request is verified. And so GrupoScore also supports 2 different modes, the group mode and pairwise mode, where the group mode has a signature attached, and the pairwise mode uses the element to calculate peer-to-peer symmetric keys, pairwise keys. And well, the profile supports both those modes. We have proof of group membership for the client, and we also have mutual authentication when a first GrupoScore exchange is completed. So expanding a bit on the features and the scenarios where you may want to use this, it's for application scenarios where you are using group communication and a client wants to access resources at multiple resource servers. And again, the point here is to enforce access control within the group for resources at the servers. And so we want to separate these 2 concepts, group membership and access control, meaning that just because you're a group member, that doesn't mean or should imply any particular access rights at the resource servers. So we separate the concept of access to the secure group communication channel through membership. And again, that's about other documents. And this draft is about access control to the resource space provided by the service in the group. So after you have joined the group and you can communicate in the group, but there should still be a way to enforce fine-grained access control within the group. And again, this also follows the zero trust paradigm, because we say basically that trust is not implicitly granted, and we have access control enforcement as granular as possible. And then I want to go over some of the updates that was done in version 2. Again, this is the same point as before. I don't have to reiterate it by using this E' construct. And we also updated examples to use the register values when available. We renamed the context ID input parameter and claim to just context ID, simpler name. And this is also more accurate and consistent with some definitions we have in 311 and 322 sections. We revised one example in figure 6, showing a CWT claim set using CBOR encoding. Now, well, it's consistent with the CBOR abbreviations from the CDDL model we defined towards the end of the document. And we also now use more meaningful values in the actual example, for instance, for IAT and X. yeah, we fixed the IANA considerations, similar fixes to the previous draft I presented. And then we need a number of needs and editorial improvements. So then I want to come to a little bit larger update. So at the moment, this profile as it is does not and cannot support the update of access rights for a client like other transport profiles of ACE does. So what we've done now is we've added an initial roadmap text and let's say placeholders and a sketched plan. How do we enable the support for update of access rights for this profile? And this mainly touches 3 sections. Section 310, where we're talking about the C to AS access token request. And then it also touches section 4 about processing at the RS. And for both of these sections, we have a small placeholder, and we're pointing to section 321, where we have the bulk of the plan, let's say. And in section 321, this is about the C2AS access token response. But here we have a number of notes and plans forward. And this is basically the plan, and what we're planning to do is define the processing of access token requests from C for dynamically updating of access rights. And what we want to do is we want to use concepts that are defined or to be defined in the workflow and params document, specifically the token series concept, which defines a set of consecutive access tokens for the same C and RS. So we want to use that concept in a particular way in this document. And associated with this concept, you have a token series ID. And this is an identifier of a token series. And that's what we actually want to use here in this document as a parameter and as a token claim. And well, how will this work? The plan is that in the ASOC response to the first request for an access token, the AS will include the token series ID to make the client aware of the ID. And then when the client wants to request a token for updating access rights, it can include the token series ID to inform the AS that this is about this token series, and also that it wants to perform get a token for update of access rights. And you can actually omit other parameters that you had included in the request for the first access token. And then in the actual in access tokens of the same series, well, you will have the claim token series ID with the same value. And when such a token is posted to the resource server, the resource server will be able to see that value and thus understand that, okay, this new token I received, it's about update of access rights, and it's intended to supersede my currently stored access token with this token series ID. So we're really building around this concept to enable the update of access rights. So, and because this is being done already in workflow and params, we don't have to define such a new similar concept in this document. Yeah, and then we had one more, I would say, bigger update. This is about clarifying that when using this profile, resource servers may want to be prepared for storing multiple access token per proof of possession key. And basically in RFC 9200, it's recommended, an RS is recommended to store only one access token per POP key. But what we've expanded on and detailed now in this draft is the new section 4.6, when we say that, well, when using this profile, an RS might have to deviate from that recommendation because there can be scenarios where this following that recommendation is too inflexible, basically. So, for instance, if you have a client C with an authentication credential AuthCred C as its POP key, well, now it may obtain a token T1 and a token T2 bound both to that AuthCred C. And okay, what kind of situations can this happen in? Well, we have 3 concrete examples listed. Number 1 is that the resource server belongs to an audience OD1 and at the same time a group audience OD2. And well, you have your T1 targeting OD1 and T2 targeting OD2 while still both bound to AuthCred C. So if these two tokens are posted to the RS may want to be prepared to store both access token, even though they have the same POP key. Second scenario is the RS is member of two OSCOR groups, G1 and G2, where they both rely on the same format of the public authentication credentials. And in this case, it would be about T1 targeting and reflecting the membership of G1, and similarly T2 targeting the group G2. So again, you have two tokens with the same POP key. Third scenario is that the RS uses this profile of ACE and a different profile, which also relies on asymmetric POP keys. And in such case, well, T1 can be issued to be used with this profile, and T2 issued to be used with the other profile, and the same problem will occur. So we clarified, just to give a heads up, that an RS may want to be ready to deviate from this recommendation from 9200. Yeah, and then I wanted to go over some next steps. What are we planning to do? Well, number one, we got feedback from an IANA review on section 11.3. And this is similar again to what I mentioned for previous draft. We should add this original specification entry to the OAuth parameter CBOR mappings registry. And secondly, we want to mention that, well, the ACE alternative workflow is an example that can be used together with this profile, and just point to it to point that it exists, and that it can potentially be used with this profile. We want to provide some guidelines on, for instance, what if you have a situation where a client wants to use both OSCOR and group OSCOR to communicate to a particular resource server. Well, in such case, we should use both profiles and, well, one token per profile, meaning that it first uses the group OSCOR profile of ACE, and then it uses the OSCOR profile of ACE. To just describe that and explain that it's possible, and some explanations on how you may want to do that in the best way. We want, again, this is coming back to what I was mentioning, enable the dynamic update of access rights, building on our roadmap. And finally, we want to consider setups where you have multiple application groups and security groups. And there could be scenarios where a client wants to get an access token spanning multiple application and security groups. As things are currently, an access token can only target one security group. So we wanted to elaborate a bit on exploring how we can make it possible for an access token to target multiple security groups. Yeah, thank you all for listening. That's the updates ahead.
All right, one from me. It's probably perfectly fine to do the one key with multiple groups, but the one thing I would ask for, this one. The one thing I would ask for is carefully write up in the security consideration sections why nothing goes wrong if you do this. And if you can't successfully write that up, then we have a problem. But let's make sure we document well exactly what the security considerations are that allow it to be okay to violate the RFC 9200 recommendation.
Yes, good point. What we put in section 4.6 should also be reflected in the security considerations, and we should analyze what we're proposing within the security considerations. Yes.
All right, Christian.
Christian, I'm just when you mentioned plans for tokens spanning groups, are there ideas yet around on how to express the scopes that might use different expressions between those groups? So, for example, when one group has an AIF path rest scope expression and the other has some other AIF expression, how those might be combined? Would that be like a composite scope from both? Would that how are there plans yet, or is this just early exploration?
We have some plans on the exact point you mentioned with different expressions or different semantics of the scope. We haven't considered that point exactly. Overall, our general plan or impression is that we may need to make some parameters that are now single parameters. We may need to make them structure parameters. You can have multiple values where today you could only have one. for the new parameters we're defining in this document.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Okay, in that case, I think we're done for today. Thank you everyone for your attention.